everyone, a pleasant day to all of you, and welcome to our 6th episode of Facts Talk podcast. This project is made possible through the collaboration between Facts Asia and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Philippines. I am Diane Carrer. I'm a TV host and news anchor based in the Philippines. Here in Facts Talk, we will examine Europe's strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And today, we will focus on the 6th priority area for cooperation, and that is security and defense. In the past few years, European states have been actively engaging in the Indo-Pacific. Last year, Facts Asia and CAS Philippines launched a compilation of special articles that tell us how European states have significant interest in the region, including their policy recommendations for cooperation. Well, we've covered a vast variety of topics in the series, ranging from economic cooperation, green transition, to maritime governance and digital governance. Now, in our 6th episode, we will talk about the developments in the security and defense concerning the Philippines, Indo-Pacific, the EU, and the European states. The Indo-Pacific region has been one of the areas that have received increased interest in the past decade. The region is embroiled in geopolitical competition, territorial disputes, and hybrid threats. As tensions in the Indo-Pacific escalate, Indo-Pacific states have sought to improve their defense and security by amping up military modernization and reaching out to like-minded states, hence changing the security dynamics in the region. With increased interest in the region, Priority 6 of the EU strategy particularly aimed to work with partners to promote an open and rules-based security architecture, explore ways to ensure enhanced naval deployments by EU member states, support Indo-Pacific partners' capacity to ensure maritime security, and facilitate capacity building for partners to tackle cybercrime. Joining us today to talk about this highly relevant topic is our special guest expert, Dr. Jagannath Panda, head and editor of the Stockholm Center for South Asia and Indo-Pacific Affairs. Dr. Panda, good day to you and welcome to Facts Talk podcast.
Hello, good morning from Stockholm, and pleasure to be here, Dan. Thank you very much for the invitation.
And thank you as well for your time. Before we discuss the 6th priority area, we want to know more about you, Dr. Panda. Tell us what you do and your expertise about security and defense.
I am heading the Stockholm Center for South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs at the Institute for Security and Development Policy, ISDP. ISDP is a medium-ranked think tank based in Sweden. We have a special focus on Asia, on Indo-Pacific. In fact, my center, which is the new center, it was established almost 2 years back, and we do focus a lot about Europe's engagement with the Asian countries and with the Indo-Pacific like-minded countries a lot. Under my center, we are focusing a lot about maritime issues, infrastructure developments, connectivity issues, including some of the defense collaborations. So, yeah, this is a bit about my introduction about my center. And you could actually visit our website, to have more information about ISDP's activities and also our center's activities.
All right. Now, Dr. Panda, focusing this time on the defense and security architecture, how will you describe the current developments in the region? Who are the players influencing the power dynamics in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, as you know, I think there is an intense rivalries going on between US and China, and the region is definitely witnessing a huge competition and rivalry between US and China, not only in one areas that is how to control the regions of Indo-Pacific or various platforms in the global politics, but also trying to dominate each other in various proceedings, in various forums. And I think that is one of the astounding aspects of this competition, that the world is still very much witnessing an intense rivalry on US and China. What we are seeing that for the first time, the US supremacy in the global order is being challenged by the Chinese supremacy. Even though during the pandemic, we saw that China has suffered a huge setback. There was a lot of negative reporting about China, the way China handled the pandemic, and the way China actually responded to address the pandemic globally, that was not really an encouraging aspect about China's rights. But we did see that now China is again coming back to its own normal and trying to have its own alliance, its own foreign policy bearings in order, and trying to build a coalition of its own to challenge the US-led order. Today, we are seeing they are expanding some of those forums, like the BRICS forums. We also recently saw the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is being expanded. So China is actually working how to influence and increase its own influence in the global order. And therefore, we could see that for the first time, there is a tussle happening, direct tussle happening between China and US when it comes to global politics. And some of these tussle are very clearly visible in the Indo-Pacific regions, which has implications for EU, for European Union, for European countries who are actually looking at Indo-Pacific as a medium of exchange of ideas and exchange of growth. And I think the way the US-China rivalries are emerging in Indo-Pacific, factoring not only the maritime issues, but also some of the territorial issues, including the Taiwan issues, that has severe implications for Europe's Indo-Pacific strategy, as well as Europe's future engagement with the Indo-Pacific.
Now, we want to know your views, Dr. Panda, on these questions. What role can the EU play as it offers states in the region a third way or an alternative to the heightening tensions between great powers? And why is the EU interested in developing the defense capacity and capabilities of Indo-Pacific states?
Well, I think if we take into account EU's foreign policy, over the last 2 decades, EU's foreign policy approaches towards Asia was more or less one-dimensional. It was much more China-centric foreign policy. But today, what we have seen after the pandemic, EU's foreign policy is becoming much more non-China-centric. In fact, today we see that EU has almost a very clear position on China, where it has seen China as a systemic rival. Not only NATO has seen China as a threat, but also EU as a political forum, as a political umbrella of all the EU member states. It sees China as a systemic rival. And that is something which we need to really take into account, that EU has severe implications in times to come when it comes to China's rights and China's maneuvering in the Indo-Pacific regions. Now, there are 2-3 aspects we need to really understand. When we are talking about EU's involvement in Indo-Pacific, we are talking about 3 particular aspects. One, in EU's non-China-centric engagement with some of the like-minded countries. It involves Japan, it involves India, it involves ASEAN countries, including Philippines. Second, we talk about EU's maritime engagement with the regions, particularly with the Indian Ocean Rim countries. Even though not all the EU member countries, they are having direct interest on the maritime issues, but we know for a fact that some of the countries like France and Germany and some of other EU countries are interested on the Indo-Pacific regions, particularly on the Indian Ocean regions. So that also is another aspect which must interest EU in times to come, when it tries to engage much more seriously with the Indo-Pacific regions. The third aspect is, I think, the issues of connectivity and the sustainable developments to infrastructure development. And I think EU has been one of those regions which talks about quality development, sustainable development. And for the first time, we are seeing that there is a scope of convergence or engagement possible between Indian Ocean regions or the Indo-Pacific regions and the EU region. So these are the aspects which are actually making EU to become a much more important player in the Indo-Pacific region since times to come.
All right. Now, Dr. Panda, what are the distinctive features for cooperation and or hard connectivity and soft connectivity potentials that may contribute to better cooperation between European states and the Indo-Pacific region?
Well, I think if we take into account, if we read and study EU's Indo-Pacific strategy, it is very, very comprehensive. One way of engaging is to identify those countries which are economically prosperous countries or economically sound countries or major economies in the Indo-Pacific regions, and try to have a much more serious collaborative bilateral oriented engagement. For example, we know now that EU has a much more Japan-centric outreach. In fact, with Japan, there is a lot happening in terms of its comprehensive engagement to a bilateral economic engagement between EU and Japan, which is a positive sign about EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. Similarly, what we are seeing is that EU-India engagement between India and EU. I don't really recall 10 years back we were really talking about this engagement that seriously. Today we are talking about it much more institutionally, much more methodologically, and not only in terms of engagement on the economic domain, on the trade and economic exchange, but also in critical areas like science and technology, in the security domains, in the defense engagements, where India is engaging with some of the critical countries in the EU regions, particularly with France and Germany, on the defense and security issues. Similarly, what we are also seeing, a kind of engagement is happening between EU and some of the Asian countries, particularly in the ASEAN region, which is an encouraging sign. These engagements are still very much maritime centric or economic centric. It's not necessarily that much in defense centric, but the way the China threat is looming large in the Indo-Pacific regions, particularly in the South China Sea and the East China Sea regions, factoring the Taiwan crisis, I think EU has got its target very focused, and that's an encouraging sign. But what is also here interesting to see the way EU is panning out its Indo-Pacific strategy. There is an Indo-Pacific strategy. And within that or outside that Indo-Pacific strategy, there talk about different kind of engagement. For example, there are initiatives like Global Gateway Strategy. And EU's Global Gateway Strategy is a strategy which talks about quality infrastructure, certification of infrastructure, and promotion of sustainable infrastructure, which is one of the most impressive aspects. If we see last one decade, China's infrastructural capability and investment oriented proposals through the Belt and Road initiatives have been questioned widely across the world. And I think EU's Global Gateway Strategy is one of those strategies which not only poses a challenge to China's Belt and Road initiatives, but also it encourages many countries in the Indo-Pacific regions to think and review that what are the issues they should be really looking for before accepting an invitation for investment or applying for a loan in a multilateral bank. In fact, all that EU's Global Gateway Strategy is talking about promoting quality infrastructure and talking about sustainable development, which the China's Belt and Road Initiative is really overlooking. So EU's Global Gateway Strategy engagement with Japan, with India, with some of the ASEAN countries are actually very encouraging signs, which also talks about that there is a non-security centric, non-defense centric engagement possible. But while all of these are more important aspects, one of the most important aspects that we are witnessing is how systematically EU's engagement with the Indo-Pacific regions on the security and defense area is panning out, particularly following the Ukraine war, the way Russia attacked Ukraine, following the Taiwan crisis, keeping in mind, I think there are concrete discussion is happening about EU's engagement, particularly with critical EU's actors like France engagement with the regions. France is a key defense player in the regions today, particularly with India. India is purchasing and importing a lot from France. And similarly, there is a lot of maritime-oriented centric engagement is happening. For example, Crimario is one of those initiatives under the EU formulations, which is actually talking about maritime-centric engagement between EU and like-minded Indo-Pacific countries. So these are the critical aspects which is putting the global politics in Indo-Pacific regions in a threshold, in a new context, and that is something which both EU and some of the ASEAN countries, including critical players like India and Japan, would like to exploit and shape the politics of the regions accordingly.
Dr. Panda, the EU announced that it will deepen existing cooperation programs such as the Enhancing Security Cooperation in and with Asia, or the SCO program, going beyond traditional security such as the fields of counterterrorism, cybersecurity, nuclear power, and crisis management. How can EU further initiatives that contribute to these fields?
Well, EUSA program is a very comprehensive program because that actually explains how EU is looking at the Asia regions. There are areas where China would obviously be a factor of those areas, and we cannot really discount those aspects. Even though Indo-Pacific as a concept is discounted in China, but we know for a fact that China is the most significant player when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region as a whole. And within that engagement, what we are seeing, there are discussions about soft security networks and hard security networks. Soft security networks like on the cyber domains, on the science and technology, on the sharing informations on critical issues. These are emerging as the critical medium of collaborations between EU and some of the countries from Asia, particularly with India and Japan. On the other hand, what we are seeing also initiatives like CRIMARIO is also helping India to stay connected, countries like India and Japan to stay connected with EU on the maritime capacity building initiatives. And I think that is one of those encouraging signs. And what is really interesting about some of this security and defense-centric engagement is that, which are maritime-centric. But I think what EU's Indo-Pacific strategy and EU's initiatives like EFSA and CRIMARIO is talking about is much more serious collaboration in bilateral as well as minilateral context, in trilateral context. And these actually encourages a number of countries to collaborate with. This kind of trilateral cooperation would be very helpful when EU is trying to improve its positioning in the ASEAN regions as well as in the region of Asia, factoring into Pacific at large.
Dr. Panda, you talked about the EU gradually increasing its naval presence in the Indo-Pacific. What are the implications of its increased joint exercises and port calls with its partners in the region, such as India, Australia, Singapore, Japan, and Vietnam? And also, do you think there is a possibility that other ASEAN member states will also receive port calls from EU member states? Which countries could possibly be prioritized?
Well, each one of these countries are critical to EU, and I think EU need a comprehensive engagement in the Indo-Pacific regions. But if we talk individual countries into account and take into account all of these things, today what we are talking about between EU and India is that we're talking about free, open, and inclusive rules-based maritime order in Indo-Pacific, which is the common thread which is binding between India and the EU. Similarly, when we are talking about critical areas of collaborations, we are talking about maritime security, we are talking about, collaborations between India's Indo-Pacific Ocean initiatives and EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. We are also talking about maritime domain awareness to capacity building, joint naval exercises. These are actually areas which are bringing EU and India together. Similarly, with the rise of the AUKUS agreement in Indo-Pacific, definitely this is a very positive engagement as far as the balance of power is concerned, where UK, US, and Australia are engaged with this defense-centric technological AUKUS agreement. What is interesting here to think that probably EU is not really ruling out of having such kind of engagement with the regions in future. And I think that is what something which should encourage us to talk about. We know for a fact that EU has a Japan-centric engagement. Like, it is time probably to have much more exercises which will be trilateral-centric. We can talk about much more such kind of exercises in Indo-Pacific region. We could talk about joint port call. We could talk about joint naval exercises. We could talk about anti-piracy and commitment to rules-based order, having trilateral and quadrilateral, nexus in the Indo-Pacific. And I think the way EU's Indo-Pacific strategy is panned out, there is a lot of room for thoughts to think and plan for the future engagement. I think what EU needs to do with the Southeast Asian countries, identify those Southeast Asian countries which are really opposing to China's encroachment in the regions. For example, if we take into account Philippines, it is one of those countries which has been quite critical about China's maritime encroachment, and I think there EU needs to really solidify its relationship with Philippines. Maybe we could think about EU, Philippines, and Japan, India, this kind of quadrilateral or minilateral exchanges where we could have drill exercises which will build not only confidence among these countries, but also try to also pass a signal to the Chinese barbarism in the Indo-Pacific regions and Chinese dominance in the Indian Ocean regions and in the South China Sea regions. Also, what is critically here to keep it in mind is the Taiwan crisis. I think the Taiwan crisis is impending, and sooner or later we will see that PLA actually taking a provocative initiative, trying to create a kind of situation where there will be a huge crisis in the Indo-Pacific regions. Is EU really ready to respond to the Taiwan crisis? Could EU possibly take a position on the Taiwan crisis? And I think it is time for EU to think about how to respond to the Taiwan crisis. We could talk about, how to respond to the crisis from Taiwan crisis. If tomorrow the PL is occupying Taiwan, how to respond to that crisis? Can we participate in a rescue operation to try to rescue the foreigners or the people who are there in Taiwan? Can we go and stand and oppose the PLA's encroachment or occupation over Taiwan? Can we really build a credible deterrence strategy to respond to China's naval power in Indian Ocean regions? So I think these are some of the challenging questions that EU must think, and therefore countries like India, Philippines, Japan, Australia, these are critical countries for collaborations in the Indian Ocean and in the South China Sea regions.
Hey, Dr. Panda, what do you think of ASEAN's and Quad's efforts in addressing the Myanmar crisis? Which avenues do you think need to be developed to lure the junta to the negotiation table? And how do China's investment in energy and infrastructure and alleged support to the junta complicate the crisis? Do you think Myanmar is another avenue in the great power competition?
Oh, yes. I think the way the military junta is in Myanmar ruling and the way it has behaved and captured the power, that is not definitely a positive signal or positive development for the regions. We are seeing the regions getting divided further and further. But I think the time has come. ASEAN must act together under that umbrella of ASEAN, inclusiveness in order to address some of these issues. Of course, Myanmar issue is a much more, complex issue, and it is a domestic issue of Myanmar, but it has have serious regional and international implications. And the more the military junta continues in Myanmar, there are severe implications and ramifications for the regions. So therefore, I think EU needs to actually talk to some of the ASEAN countries how to really go for more democratic means and democratic regimes and upholding the rules-based order in the region. So we need to discuss about critical issues, including Myanmar, with our engagement with the EU, and that should not be really overlooked.
Right. Last question, but definitely not the least. What are the biggest threats and challenges in developing defense and security relations with Indo-Pacific states?
Well, I think there are many issues that needs to be thought out. One is that the way the maritime issues are unfolding, we need to talk about how to protect the sea line of communication. And in order to do that, we need serious naval exercises, multi-nations exercises. We need to also have submarine capabilities. We need to have undersea cable, capabilities to pass signaling and protect our sea coast. And I think these are the issues where we need to have much more concrete collaborations. But at the same time, we also need to talk about defense management, arms transfer, illegal arms transfer. We also need to talk about defense management, how we could have credible defense management and arms supply without really violating the international laws and rules and regulations, factoring some of the arms rules. So I think the time has come to talk about some of these issues very, very clearly and concretely. And I think EU needs to get its act together in order to engage with the regions much more seriously on the defense domain. While saying that, I think EU as a umbrella concept, as a multilateral forum, will find it difficult to engage in terms of defense engagement with the countries, because not all the EU countries might not agree to this. But I think there is a huge possibility for EU to engage on the soft securities areas, particularly in the security and strategic issues, if not in the core defense-centric issues.
Well, on that note, we would like to thank you, Dr. Jagannath Panda, for such a comprehensive discussion of the Indo-Pacific's regional security architecture today. Well, I agree that there's so much more that could be developed between the EU and smaller countries like the Philippines, given the evolving security needs in the region. Again, Dr. Panda, thank you very much. Now, to our listeners, if you loved and learned from this podcast, please share this episode with your friends and colleagues. Also, if you missed our previous episodes, you may also listen to them here on Spotify. We invite you as well to like and follow Facts Asia official social media accounts, facebook.com/FactsAsia on Facebook and at FactsAsia.org on Twitter. You may also visit our website, www.factsasia.org, to stay updated on our projects. So that's all for now. Again, I am Diane Carrer. Until the next episode of Facts Talk.